We're recording. Boom, we're set to go. Welcome to the 23rd Paparelli Zoom chat for entrepreneurs. Thanks for coming. You know, we're all about entrepreneurs helping entrepreneurs. Last week, we discussed perseverance with my friend who happens to be on this call too, is Rusty Gordon. Do you have too much perseverance? And on this one, I learned that investors and entrepreneurs are not on the same page. We are in the deal for two different reasons. My primary reason for investing and your primary reason for starting a company as an entrepreneur are always different. So I'm going to write about this. I think that a lot came out of it. And Rusty, thanks for doing that. This was just one insight that I got out of this. We always learn something in all of these conversations. So every week, great ideas and insights are going to be shared. That's why I believe that I always say, together, we're stronger. I have a little ask for you. I'm going to be starting a Slack channel that'll be entrepreneurs helping entrepreneurs. And it's really about, of course, the foundation for it is this Zoom chat. If you'd like to be invited to join that channel, if you would supply your email address in the chat box, then I will be sure when I kick it off to invite you. You know, we've also posted some Zoom chat suggestions for you in the chat box, so you can take a look there for those. John will be doing that. Use the chat to ask questions. John Marshall is monitoring the chat for us. He'll jump in from time to time with your question if it's appropriate for the conversation that we're having at that time. If not, he's going to hold your question for the Q&A, which happens right after the call ends, which is at 9:45. So between 9:45 and 10, our guest, Patrick, has agreed to stick around for that extra 15 minutes, and you'll be able to ask your question directly to him. Today's topic is selling to the enterprise as a startup. So, and the entrepreneur's thought of the day, which I always have from the Bible, today's verse is, "But Moses protested to God, 'Who am I to appear before Pharaoh? Who am I to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt?'" Exodus 3:11. And my application for this is simple. You may not think you're qualified to sell to the enterprise, but it doesn't matter. You have to do it if you're going to build a company of great value. Also, as a follow-on to that verse, I lead a Bible study, Zoom Bible study on Thursdays from 12 to 1. If you're interested in attending, just send me your email address to charlie@paparelli.com and I'll put you on the invite list. So that's the preliminaries. Let's get started. Almost every startup I've worked with and I have observed initially targets SMB, which is small to medium-sized businesses. Some sold to bigger corporations, but it was a departmental sale, which feels a lot like SMB. As a startup gained traction and begins this hockey stick climb, if you will, enterprise sales just have to be cracked. It took Salesforce.com, having read that fellow's book, over 3 years of selling before they sold their first enterprise deal. And the same can be said of SalesLoft, right here in town with Kyle Porter and Rob Foreman. It took them a long time to start moving to enterprise sales from SMB. But the reason to get there is simple. Enterprise sales adds great value to a business. But at the same time, enterprise sale is a very complex sale. We start in SMB because we can talk right to the decision maker, and it's easy to qualify and sell if you're talking to the person who's going to make the decision. In an enterprise sale, you're actually selling to a committee of buyers, and these buyers have cross purposes which assign different weight and economic value to the problem you aim to solve for them. But if you're going to build a company of great value, you must sell to the enterprise. So today's topic, are you missing the secret to enterprise selling? That's what we're going to be talking about today. And my special guest to help in this, who's learned a lot about it and wants to share with us, is Patrick Taylor. I met Patrick in the early days of ISS. You know, he was employee number 12. He was hired by his Georgia Tech fraternity brother, whom we all know, Tom Noonan. He joined as the VP of marketing, but back then everybody was a salesman, as it is with any early stage startup like that. In 2003, Patrick took the entrepreneur plunge himself. He started Oversight Systems. His first office was at the ATDC at Georgia Tech, and that's where I really got to meet Patrick because we sort of ran into each other more often because we're in the same space. Patrick cracked the code on enterprise selling at ISS with Tom and later at Oversight. Today he's going to share what he learned in selling an enterprise product that solved a new problem, which is ISS, the ISS background, and with Oversight, an enterprise product that solved an old problem. And there's a difference in these two, which is, it's going to be interesting, this conversation. There's going to be a lot to learn today from Patrick. He did sell Oversight, to let you know, in 2018 to a private equity firm. And he joined Tom again and the team now at TechOperators Venture Capital. So Patrick has jumped the fence from entrepreneur to investor. Patrick, thanks for giving back today to our community. We really appreciate it. Welcome.
Thank you. You're glad to be here.
Well, you're going to do a great job today, and I appreciate you setting this time aside. I know how busy you are.
I have to comment real quick, Charlie, on the perseverance comment. So Oversight was a 17-year overnight success story, right? So we just got liquidity in August. And I always wondered, I've wondered, perseverance, being stubborn, being stupid. I really it's all kind of a big spectrum to me after grinding it out at Oversight for 17 years.
Well, I also know, when we do that, we're talking about perseverance. One of the things is, and we didn't talk a lot about this with Rusty, but once you take on other people's money, it's like you're in, right? I mean, where do you go? I mean, how much money did you raise at Oversight?
Wow, over probably $35 million over the course of it.
Wow.
And we've talked, you and I've talked about this before. My view was, in particular, the early investors, which are a bunch of people that just invested in me, really, it didn't matter if I had something better to do. I felt an obligation, a duty to keep going until, as long as they wanted me to serve, I felt like it was my duty to continue doing that. So that was, like I said, 17 years later, overnight success. So
I love that. I have a friend of mine that he's a international speaker, and he's got some pretty big fees and all this. And he said he ran into somebody and they said, you seem to be doing pretty well. You really are an overnight success. And he goes, yeah, it took me 10 years, right? Nothing comes easy when you're building value. That's all I've learned in this whole angel investing side. But Patrick, I'm wondering, you graduated, just to kind of give us a little bit of a level set background, you graduated from Georgia Tech with a mechanical engineering degree, which was pretty impressive. And then Tom Noonan went to Rockwell. Where did you start your career? How did that all?
So actually my first job I co-opted Georgia Tech, where I designed mechanical electrical plans for office buildings. Okay. And so my first full-time job was selling centrifugal chillers in Florida. So selling to contractors basically was what I did for the first 2 years. And somewhere along the way, a family friend who's a Georgia Tech professor had mentioned that getting an MBA was an interesting complement to an engineering degree. I remember asking him, well, where should you go to school? He goes, well, Harvard's the best one. So that's where I applied.
Okay.
And I ended up going there in 1988.
And
got out in 1990.
Is that what kind of moved you to California?
It is, in a way. While I was there, this guy named Jim Cash, who was the management information systems professor, made a comment that we hadn't really seen the computer revolution yet. So this is 1988. He said, when people start changing the way they actually operate a business with computers, that's the actual computer revolution. That captured my fancy. And I decided the best way to participate in that was to go get a job at a technology company. So I got a summer job with Symantec, And then Oracle, Larry Ellison, had decided that he needed to start grooming his own salespeople. And so he charged this woman, Nushin Hashimi, to hire 50 recently minted MBAs from, and he listed, these are the 10 schools you can go recruit at. So, this is 1990. Oracle is, not very many people know who Oracle is at the time.
That's when he started, building that sales force?
No. He'd been doing that for a while. In Larry's opinion, he'd already hired and fired all the good salespeople in technology, and he decided he needed to start making his own. Right? So he was going to.
That doesn't sound like Larry Ellison.
He's going to get these. Well, Larry never really liked. I mean, he's a technical guy way more than he's a sales guy. So he never particularly liked the sales team anyway. And this woman, she was supposed to hire people from these 10 schools that had prior experience in technology. Fortunately for me, she was running behind quota. She hadn't gotten to, and I was, if anything, just persistent. I just, I'd call her every week and just trying to work it. And so eventually she, sometime, when she realized she's not going to get her 50 quota, she gave me a job offer, and that's what got me in technology. And, as everybody knows, once you've got your first job in technology, you're kind of made. I never had to.
So I
was a technology guy ever since.
So you were a software sales guy for Oracle.
That's right.
I didn't know that. That's pretty cool. Okay. Because when you joined, because the other thing that happened, so then I guess Tom decided it was time to get the band back together, you and Tom.
I guess he,
how did that all happen?
So we had kind of kept in touch over post-college. For a while, he was running a company in Connecticut, and I was working for Symantec, and they had bought a company in Connecticut, and so Tom, operated out of our house part of the time when he was up there. When we just stayed in touch over the years, and so I'm talking to him. He was looking at new jobs. He was talking to Oracle about being VP of Applications Marketing. He was talking to Joe Trino about joining some manufacturing startup in Atlanta. And he goes, and I met this kid from Georgia Tech that has a security scanner. And I'm like, Tom, what's a security scanner?
And you were at Symantec.
I was at Symantec, and at that point in time, living in Los Altos.
Okay.
So,
I mean, you were in the security business and you didn't know what he was talking about.
No, yeah. Well, Symantec wasn't nearly as much of a security company at that time. That happened. Actually, I'll give you a real quick story on that. We shared a PR firm with Symantec, and the head of the firm calls me one day, and we've been marvelously successful with these guys. This is ISS and Symantec, and he calls me and he says, "Hey, we're going to have to resign your account." I'm like, "Why?" He goes, "Well, Symantec is a much bigger client." He goes, "And I was just in a meeting with the new CEO." He goes up to the whiteboard and he writes 3 letters on the board. Those 3 letters are ISS. And he goes, "That's who we need to become. We need to become just like ISS." So he goes, "Sorry, you don't pay us enough money." So, and so that's when Symantec became the cybersecurity company, because they were trying to.
Right.
John Thompson was the CEO, was trying to replicate ISS's success.
So go back to Tom now, when he said, I met this kid from Georgia Tech named Klaus.
Yeah, there's so many great stories about that. One, you and I were sharing this yesterday. Tom still hadn't accepted a job yet, but he went on a sales call with Chris to the Jet Propulsion Lab, I believe. And so he tells me, he said, "So I'm in the meeting, and it's just the natural thing that needs to happen is I have to ask for the order, right? That I need to say, okay, will you give us, $50,000? This is $50,000." And he said, I didn't really work for the company yet, but it was really the thing that needed to happen at that point in the meeting. And so I did, and I decided, well, shoot, if I can sell this stuff, without even working there, I probably ought to go ahead and join the company. So that was some of Tom's first big ahas. And wow,
but he was in the same position as you, right? He didn't even know he didn't know the security scanner, because he told me a story about that same call. And he said, he went in there and the guy said, "I don't have any security problems." So Chris got on and he said, can we run a little scanner thing? And he did. And it like lit the whole network up. And the guy goes, well, how much, well, how much is it? What do I do? Right. And Tom didn't even know what he was selling. Okay.
The way the knowledge was transferred in those days, Tom listened to Chris pitch it enough times that he kind of figured out the PowerPoint presentation.
How old is Chris?
Chris
at that time?
He's 20, something like that. 21.
Right. So Tom, this experienced executive now, right? A sales executive is listening to this 20-year-old kid pitch this thing. And where did Chris get that? Where did he get the idea? Part of the pitch.
Chris had always been active on the internet, for one. And two, he was inspired by this book called Neuromancer. I'll think of the author's name in a second. But in Neuromancer, they talked about they didn't call it the internet, but everything was connected, and they had this software that would go and explore and find flaws and vulnerabilities in it.
I see.
William Gibson is the author's name.
Okay.
And so sort of pairing that idea and people would share in the chat groups, hey, I found this vulnerability, this weakness. And Chris sort of put all that together, came up with a shareware version of ISS first, sort of a free version, and then eventually started selling it. I think he sold it to an Italian research agency the first time. His roommates ended up getting really aggravated with him because the phone would ring all the time in their dorm with people calling from all over the world trying to buy software. And so between that and the fact that all the kids at Georgia Tech were downloading and scanning the Georgia Tech network, and Georgia Tech wasn't really happy about that either, he decides to check out of school for a while, moves in with his grandmother. And to give Chris sold $120,000 worth of ISS in the first year, like by himself as a 20-something.
No kidding.
Kid. Yeah, no, I mean, that's just.
You talk, I got a friend, I don't know if he's on, Nelson Chu is so well known for his famous line is, if you're going to do an investment, you got to see a hair on fire problem. And there's no better evidence than a 20-year-old programmer selling $120,000 worth of stuff worldwide, right?
Yeah, that was the real thing there. And then, gosh, it sold 50,000 the next year. And then we sold I joined after that year, and we sold 3.4 million, something like that.
What did it look like when you joined? You said you were number 12. So what did ISS look like then? And what was the sales expectations and challenge at the time?
So we were selling, this is back in the old days of selling a perpetual license, in maintenance. Chris had actually originally done it kind of as a service. So to be fair, Chris was way ahead of his time. The interesting thing about it was that
software as a service to a perpetual license.
Yeah, correct.
That's what happens when the old guys show up, right?
I love it. 1996. He would sell a scanning service is what he would do. I'll come scan your network for you once a month or something.
Oh, I got it. Okay.
So it was kind of a SaaS product.
Yeah.
To be fair. So the interesting thing then was, like when I joined, my bet was, okay, people are going to connect their computers, like the general work population's computers, to the internet. Like that wasn't a foregone conclusion in 1995, 1996, but I figured they would.
Yeah, because Netscape just went public, I think. Was that 95?
Yeah, I don't remember specifically.
Yeah, first $1 billion zero revenue company.
And then, and the other thing was, I kind of bet they were going to use TCP/IP, and at least half the market would use TCP/IP as opposed to NetWare, SPX/IPX, if you remember that. And so the trick was, or not the trick, the challenge was helping people understand that there was something they needed to worry about, right? This was a brand new, connecting your computers to an outside network was a brand new thing, which was introducing a new problem to people. Now,
Yeah.
the challenge was they didn't necessarily know they had the problem, like the guy you cited earlier, but it was really easy for us to show it to them because we could just scan their network and we could show them hundreds of problems they had.
Okay.
And so that was
So that was the pilot sale, is that you would say, well, let us just scan your network and see if
Yeah.
there's anything there, right?
we would do we would do a free download. We would give you a license to let you scan a few hundred computers. It was guaranteed we were going to find stuff. Now, some of it may have been false positives, but we were going to produce a big long report of issues.
Okay.
Like our challenge was, people would come to you and say, well, I know I have these 10 security problems. Why do I need your product? And, I've got more than enough work to keep me busy for the next month or whatever. And, what we learned to say was, well, why don't you make sure you're fixing the 10 most important problems? I know there's 10 problems out there, but there's actually 100. You got to make sure you're fixing the most important 10, if that's the way you're apply your resources. Those were the selling challenges for us.
Tom, you and Tom, so you were selling, you were a software sales guy that had training in selling to enterprise. If you were selling Oracle at some point, right? And Tom, I think, was with Dun & Bradstreet Software.
That's correct.
Right. So he was an enterprise type sales guy. So did you guys immediately start selling enterprise? Like you said, like Chris sold to a lab, for example, there was these smaller sales because you can talk to the, so is that what happened? I guess is what I'm asking. Did you sell to enterprise right out of the gate?
Yes, we were from the get. You sort of have to, if you work the problem a different way, who was connecting their computers to the internet? Because those are the people we could sell to. And that was far and away. So that's why labs were the first people, because it's all the guys using DARPANET, right? That's why Jet Propulsion Labs and whatever the lab was in Italy, et cetera. And as more and more corporations started connecting their computers to the internet, that's were people who were now having a problem we could solve. It was, as I said, it was kind of it was a new problem, but that's in my opinion, it's a great place to be, is helping people solve something that is a new and growing problem for them.
So this whole idea of connecting things to the internet created the new problem.
Absolutely. And then you've got, and then we were, I don't know if you remember, so in 1998, I think Yahoo was taken offline for roughly a day by a distributed denial of service attack. Well, that makes CNN, and we're on CNN explaining what happened. And
how many people were you then when you were on CNN?
Oh, I don't know, probably 50 or something like that. I get phone calls from all my buddies who are walking through the airport going, "Hey, I saw your fat head on headline news rotation. What was that all about?" So, that was back in the days when headline news was actually news. And
what was the challenge in selling to these enterprise people back then on this new problem? It seems like you hit something that just took off. It was a rocket ship.
Yeah.
Was there any problems, or was it just like taking orders?
No, it was, there were certainly problems. You would get a lot of people saying, well, I could, for the million, they were saying, gosh, I think this was AT&T. I forget who this was. Tom McKnight can tell you the story of the guy we were selling to said, "Oh, well, we shoot for $1 million. I can go hire 3 programmers and build this myself." And you'd have to sell around. Well, yeah, but you're not going to keep making it better year after year after year, and that's what we're going to do, et cetera, et cetera. There were some of those kind of. There was some shareware versions of products, so we'd have to sell our value.
You got up to like $1 million price points.
Yeah, we were getting for really big deals. Yeah, there was one sales rep we had who Tom will tell you, McKnight will say he was worried once he was going to get fired because this guy sold a $7 million deal to the Air Force, which meant he was going to get $1 million commission check. And he told his wife, "I think Noonan's going to fire me in the morning when I show up." So, but Tom wrote the check. Yeah, Tom, that same guy, gosh, he did 2 years in a row. Essentially, he ended up with a commission check that had 2 commas in it.
Wow.
So, yeah, they were good times. If you were the right,
I always say what you want to do as a software sales guy is you do want to get on the fast train that's just leaving the station, right?
Yeah, well,
that timing, just because it's not so much. It's not as hard to sell. There is some order taking piece to it, right?
Yeah, they're still working the account and figuring out, where you're going to get the budget dollars from. And, so challenges we would have had then at ISS would have been, there's somebody probably not that high in the organization that understands he's got security issues and wants to do something about them, but he doesn't have budget. Nobody has decided to budget for a security scanner. And so you had to help that guy make his case to get budget, right? So when early on I hire a new product manager, I have him go out and say, all right, you need to design some really good reports. And so this guy was a genius at that. And the engineering guy comes walking into me and goes, what the hell are we building all these reports for? That's not going to identify new security vulnerabilities. That's not going to make our product better. These reports are a waste of time. And I remember telling him, look, Dave, the reports are going to help the guy that uses our product explain what he's doing to his bosses so he can get a bigger budget, so he can buy more of our products, so he can fix more security problems. So this really is helping make the world a better place. And you go, oh, okay, I got it. So those were the kind of challenges.
But that's one of those secrets to sell, to enterprise selling, right? How do you arm the guy that really has the problem without the budget so that he can find the guy, explain it to the guy that does have the budget?
Yeah, that's the problem with the challenge with a new problem is nobody knew to budget for it last year, right?
Yeah.
That's the, it's not all easy.
Right? So with this new, who was the guy that you were actually selling to? Did you find that who had the problem, if you will, in the corporation?
Gosh, back then there really weren't. There were very few chief information security officers at the time, right? You would call it, a CISO today. Very few of those. It was usually someone who was managing the network. That's where the money was, around people that were in charge of networking. So
who did they? Who did they report to?
They reported to the CIO. So it would have gone up through the CIO's organization. You just wouldn't have had at the time, or it was rare to see an entirely separate information security, cybersecurity.
Well, I get all that. So when you talk, if you called on the CIO, he didn't think he had a security problem.
No, probably not.
Right.
Yeah, it changed. Every time we appeared on CNN, it helped us. It helped him understand he probably did. But yeah, I mean, all this.
CNN was your secret marketing?
It was awesome. It was great. They would go, so, I have CNN, you have their number saved in my cell phone, like a couple of reporters. I'm driving to work. I'm driving up through North Atlanta. I'm on Mount Vernon or something. My phone rings. And at the time, cell reception was kind of spotty up there. So I see it CNN. I pull over on the side of the road because I've got a signal. I can talk to them, and I'm barely getting them. And they're telling me, hey, something, blah, 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 security problem. Can you talk about it? I have no earthly idea what they're talking about, right? Something had happened last night. I said, absolutely. Can you be at the office at 11? And they're like, sure, we can be at 11. So I hang up the phone and I call Keith Cooley, who ran engineering. And I'm like, hey, Keith, something happened last night. I have no idea what. I could barely understand the CNN people, but they'll be there at 11. Could you get the team working on it? And of course, our engineers all knew about the problem. So by the time I show up to the office, they can explain it to me, and I can figure out how to explain it to CNN, and they show up at 11. And by that point in time, we had so back then, right, you needed to test your user interface on different size monitors because everything, nothing worked that well. So we had this big bank of monitors that was part of the QA lab. And the QA team had developed, when we had CNN coming in, they would put all these fake programs up there that kind of made it look like a security operations center and that stuff was happening. And we come and, I'd sit in front of that and CNN happening. It looked like we had all this stuff happening out on the internet, and it was all.
You were the biggest company in the world, right?
Yeah.
You were the NASA Space Center with the rocket in the air. I get it. So how did we go? So this was dealing with this selling enterprise to a new problem, okay, that was very, very hot. And you had this, which so hot that CNN was calling you up as this little company, right? So that helped to propel the ISS certainly, and started to rationalize the enterprise sale. Let's move over to Oversight. That was a little bit different. So what was the problem that Oversight was sort of dealing with or trying to solve?
So there are a couple of ex-ISS guys and I met over a Starbucks, and they talked about the fact that much like what we used to see in networks, that there were bad things happening on the networks. They said, look, in these big financial applications, and they had some exposure to the kind of ERP systems the government was using. They said people can commit fraud, and there's no real way anybody's looking for it. There's no real controls over it. And so we should build something like intrusion detection, which was one of the really home run products at ISS. We should build something like that, but instead of looking at packets on a network to find hackers, we'll look at business transactions to find fraud. And so that was the genesis of the idea.
So you kind of went from taking a horizontal product that was a technical product, and you made it sort of a vertical product in a sense. It was an application.
I mean, the problem.
At least you were applying it to business problem, right?
Yeah. We were applying it to. It's almost really a very different level in the stack, right? We were operating
on a transition for new products. That's what happens. That's what comes out of technology products that are broad based like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and then there really was, other than the idea, none of the technology was terribly the same. So
what was it like selling that issue?
Well, at the time, I didn't realize how different it was going to be. So there are just layers of difference. So one, the people you were selling to had a very different, I'm gonna call it character to them. So the very techie guys who sold to at ISS, they loved to try a new product. You could put a free download and they would try it out just for the hell of it, right? They love that. The guys we're selling to, that were working in a shared service center in corporate finance for name your favorite Fortune 1000 company, they really didn't like trying new products, right? That wasn't what they were about. They were kind of all about plugging away. If you think about,
I do it the way I do it, right?
Yeah, the really big, adventuresome, risk-taking people in finance work on Wall Street, right? The person who's almost by definition, if you're working in a shared service center, right? So I've, all the expense reports for General Electric run through this one group. You're almost by definition somebody that's just grinding it out.
How do you move that? How do you move that guy forward in a sale? Because you knew you had that ISS-like hot product, right?
I did, and
and then you hit the wall, right?
Yeah, it was much harder selling that. The other part about it was I wasn't telling them about something new. They already knew they had, and we started out looking at accounts payable. We sort of evolved and added in expense reports. So T&D, and that ended up being better, easier thing to sell into. But everybody already knew they've always been worried about what are those crazy sales reps doing.
Is that what it was? Auditing,
was that?
It was auditing, travel, and entertainment. That's kind of where you went.
That ended up being our best lead punch.
Okay, great. All right.
So
what happened?
It helped a lot that people knew that they're always worried about what these crazy sales reps are doing. Right. That was an easy fear to sell into. But the problem is you've been doing something about it for a long time. So I am aware of this risk. It's not a new risk. I've come up with a way of solving it. I think I have it in control, reasonably in control.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we had to learn to do was to convince them that, yes, for this problem you've dealt with forever, I've got a better way. And that's harder selling. I've got to get you to change your habits or the way you've worked. And that is, to me, more challenging selling. As someone's told me before, we all have 50 good ideas of things we should be doing that would be better than what we're doing today. Right? I should be doing yoga every day. So I'm limber and agile like Charlie is.
Yeah, but what it
But I
gets
don't.
but what it gets down to is a guy saying that, yeah, it is a problem, but I'm dealing with the problem.
And I've come away, and I have to convince you I've got a better way, and that is harder selling. To me, that's much harder selling.
Because now you're asking me to change how I do something. Yeah.
And then the second, or not second, another thing we noticed, or I came to learn. So we'll pick on GE as an example. So we sold GE.
Oh, it's easy to pick on them now. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, at the time they were spending $2 billion a year on travel.
Wow.
It's smaller now. And broadly speaking, we could say, so we figured out over time that like fraud was the sizzle, but the real place we could save people money is we would help you drive wasteful spending out of your T&E budget, right? And normally we could probably help you reduce your travel budget by 4%, 4 to 6%. So for GE, that's $80 million a year, right? Wow, that's great. And then you could ask me, well, would GE pay you? And I'd say about $225,000. And you would go, are you just the biggest pricing idiot in the world that you should have been able to at least get $1 million, right? At 80-to-1 payback. I mean, Come on, Patrick. Well, here's the problem. The $80 million we were saving, that accrued to all the different P&Ls in GE. So some of it was GE Plastics, someone was aircraft engines, whoever, right? The first person in GE that saw all $80 million was the CFO, right? Because everybody else, it's something, but it's just a little piece of the travel budget of a particular P&L. Right. The CFO saw all $80 million, but it turns out the CFO of GE doesn't care about $80 million. $80 million is below his radar screen, right? He's solving billion-dollar problems. So the person we sold
so the other side of this thing was to look is just say what's important to us and seems meaningful to us as entrepreneurs, like a meaningful number, is it pales in perspective to what the buyer thinks is meaningful. And it's important not to have our perspective, but to have his perspective.
Yes. Okay. And yeah, so the guy that was buying from us ran a shared services center, and we helped him drop his headcount from 60 people to 12. So we were way more efficient, but that saved him some money, and we were able to justify $225,000. And so you have to also, as you're sort of pointing out there, get in the person you're selling to shoes and realize what's her win and not what just is the overall company's win. So it's great we saved GE $80 million, but the person I'm selling to, that didn't, he would never get any, that wasn't his money. He was too far away from an org chart standpoint from where that $80 million was being saved. And so one of the things you really have to look at is, or I believe you want to pay close attention to, there's my user buyer and there's the economic buyer, the person who's going to come up with the money, and or the person who maybe we're saving money. The further apart they are on the org chart, the harder the selling is going to be. So there's shit, now I'm blanking on the name of it. It was the second company Tom went to run, and they, the name of the company just a second, but they sold software that would put printers and switches to sleep when they weren't being used. Julex, thank you,
Yeah,
yes.
okay.
That would save you money on your electricity bill, right? Great idea. Here was a challenge. The person who had to use the software was a CIO, and he didn't pay the electric bill. Somebody else in another part of the organization paid the electric bill. And if your software didn't work right, and the switch didn't wake up or the printer didn't wake up or whatever, who's getting the phone call and getting their rear end chewed out? The CIO. So he's really not all that interested in using your software necessarily. And it's just another one of those, the further all this stuff is apart on the org chart, the harder the selling can be.
Wow. Between the user buyer and the economic buyer.
Yeah, the person who's got to come, the person who's you're going to be saving. And the economic buyer is technically like the person who has the budget. There's also the person who you are saving money.
Okay, can you wrap it up for me and say, how did you solve the problem? Because eventually, you stayed in business 17 years and your overnight success. So how did you wind up solving this problem?
There's a bunch of interesting things about that. One,
they got a couple minutes, so
okay,
quick. Okay,
I'll wind real quick. One was we realized that we're only gonna sell to people who already believe they have a problem managing the risk and expense reports. So we quit using our marketing energy to explain all the problems with expense reports, because I realized one day, like, you know what, if you don't think you have a problem, I don't have the time to make you smarter. I'm only going to sell to people that already care. That was one big one. And then we started learning, it's called the challenger sales methodology. So I really needed to shake you out of your comfort zone and say, no, there really is a much better way to handle these issues that you've been handling for 20 years.
Yeah.
But I really have to challenge you to think about the problem a different way. So you really had to sell on that challenger mindset and realize that the only value we were bringing was saving people time. It wasn't that how much I reduced your waste in T&E, it was how much time did I save you, Mr. Person running a shared service center.
Okay.
But and I see this at some of the startups we have at TechOperators of going, hey, you're only going to sell to people who already know they have your problem. If it's an existing problem, you probably don't have to spend as much time in your marketing explaining the problem to people.
That's a huge insight. In other words, qualify hard up front, right? You think you have a problem with this, right? No, not really. Well, thank you. If someday you do, you should call me. Okay, right?
Yeah. And most of the time, it's
not everybody's going to love you. That's what it comes down to, right?
No, and it just changes. If it's it's existing problem, I've got to challenge your way of approaching it because you've already known about it. I probably don't need to spend as much time convincing you the problem is there. You already know about it.
Maybe we've got to challenge your thinking. Maybe we'll get into that a little bit when we get into the Q&A here, which is we're going to get to in just a minute. One thing I do want to ask, and this is for the entrepreneurs, is now that you're with TechOperators as a VC, what gets your attention when talking to an entrepreneur?
This is by two things. One, you've got some revenue traction. We like to say we want to see you have $1 million in ARR, but the bigger thing that gets our attention is you're growing. There's some acceleration to that. And I'll tell people, if I run into a business that, let's say, hey, we started selling it in January, we're up to $600,000 in ARR in August, I can think it's a stupid idea and I'll try to figure it out, because just that revenue traction just speaks the world, at least to this venture capitalist. Like if you see something that's hitting it and growing, We got to, well, the market's saying
It's
something.
hard to argue against separating, watching a transaction happen on a regular basis between a buyer and a seller, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Exactly.
oh, it must be real. I don't get it, but somebody's finding value in this thing. Well, Patrick, look,
I must be wrong, right?
thanks so much for taking the time to do this, and I appreciate you sticking around for the Q&A. But I love that there's so many insights that came out of this. One that sort of struck me is really put yourself into the buyer's shoes in a enterprise sale. I mean, get their perspective on the problem that they see. All right. And how the enterprise works, what are they dealing with, and how to try to solve this problem. But there's so many others that you talked about. And I'm sure some of you actually came up with some insights too. If you'd send them to me, I'll publish your insights with the summary and I'll give you credit. So my weekly reminder to the entrepreneurs is watch your cash. It goes out fast and comes in slow. So learn fast, decide fast, and go fast. Next week's Zoom chat for entrepreneurs will be on October 7th. And my guest will once again be somebody who is very popular, who's Rob Foreman, the CEO and co-founder of SalesLoft. And we're going to be talking about a nuance, which is, as the number 2, he was behind Kyle Porter. How do you step into the spotlight of leadership? And he did it. And I think it's going to be an interesting conversation. And that's what makes the company even more valuable. So do me a favor, please share this weekly Zoom chat invite with your peers. Help me and help us grow this community. Sign in early to catch up with people you know or people you want to meet. I'll be here 15 minutes early every week. And remember, I am praying for you. Thanks for attending. This is the end of the interview portion of the call. We're now going to move to the Q&A. John Marshall will be our moderator, and then he'll give you an opportunity to ask your questions. At 10 a.m., I will end the call. John, I'll put it on to you. Go ahead.
All right. Thank you very much, Troy. Thank you, Patrick. That was great. Patrick, Andy Borgman has a question for you. Andy, please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you so much. The insight that you had there about only selling to people, you had to realize that you only sell to the people that they have the problem was particularly helpful for me. I guess my follow-up question to that is what were the tips and tricks, or how'd you find people, or what was successful ways of finding people that knew they had the problem?
So again, for us, it was the big thing. Like we took a whole bunch of marketing energy away from explaining how big the T&E problem was and waste problem. So we saved a bunch of energy doing that, and then started figuring out that the really easy way for us was basically who are people that are processing lots of expense reports. So we were able to sort of back into, okay, who's going to have this problem big enough that the efficiency we could bring to the table would really be meaningful to them. And for us, that sort of worked its way into, okay, people that process lots of expense reports, the fact that we can make you some increment better on each expense report, all of a sudden that adds up to some meaningful amount of money. So once you figure that out, then it wasn't terribly hard to figure out which organizations that was. It was just big companies. For us, it was basically big companies. Number of employees, revenue kind of sort of was a pretty good proxy, but a company that did lots of revenue with very few people actually was a terrible prospect for us, right? It was the number of employees, the number of travelers that ended up mattering. So that's how we particularly backed into that. I'm trying to think, making that more general purpose is, we found a proxy.
Where's the evidence for the problem, right? That's what you got to.
We were able to figure out again, you had it, and then we changed our marketing messaging that would be, here, if you're handling lots of expense reports, we're going to make you way more efficient at doing it. You're going to do a better job too. You're going to drive a bunch of waste out and all this kind of stuff. The other interesting thing we figured out was it was really the thing that helped us. So remember, I said you got to shape people and get them to think about this problem they've had for a long time a new way. So the real thing we figured out was, it turns out most companies, if I find that Charlie spent too much money at a hotel on his last trip, I'm probably not going to actually jam Charlie and not reimburse him. That's not, most companies aren't going to do that. What I really want is I want Charlie to make better decisions the next time he travels. And when we started messaging to people that, hey, we're going to help you influence your travelers' future decisions, that was, they like, okay, yeah, wow, you're right. That is the way I should be thinking about it. We sort of shook them up, and this isn't about tracking down problems and expense reports and calling people up. This is about just actually letting people know that you're paying attention and having a way to reach out to them and say, hey, we noticed this and blah, blah, blah. And get them to make smarter decisions in the future.
See the problem differently. The challenge you're saying.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Great. Thank you very much, Patrick. And thank you for the question, Andy. Louise, go ahead and please ask your question after you unmute yourself.
Hopefully I'm unmuted now.
There you go. Perfect.
So this is awesome. Thank you. You're telling the story of my life. And how did you get to that 225K price when it sounded such a tiny amount of how much you were saving? What was your thinking around getting to that point? I'm in exactly the same situation.
So the real thinking was the person we were selling to, he ran a shared services center, right? So a centralized group that handled accounts payable and expense reports. We did a trial with them and were able to demonstrate that he could do a better job with much fewer people. And that was, and there's sort of a mild backstory to that is, at the time they had a team in India of 60 people who were looking at expense reports. And they also had an initiative at GE to try to empower women in the Middle East. And so not only did they cut the people in India, they then employed 12 women in Saudi Arabia who use Oversight to look at all the expense reports. So yeah, we also tied to a bigger picture initiative. So we're saving a bunch of money because we collapsed 60 people to 12 people. And then on top of that, he was able to say, we moved to a team in Saudi Arabia.
So where did the 225 come from?
It was a fraction, some percentage of the labor savings he came up with. Yeah, so we probably was saving $2 million worth of labor going from 60 people to 12 people. And we were just a percentage of those savings.
Louise, I think that you could also connect with Patrick. He helps entrepreneurs too, even.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Patrick at TechOperators.com.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you all very much. Thank you. T, go ahead and ask your question, please.
Hey, Patrick, thanks a lot for doing this. Just quickly, could you talk about you talked about a trial that you would offer them the trial. How did you look at that versus paid versus unpaid? We're going through a similar thing in terms of, we deal with health systems and we want, health systems to use our product and see the value, but making sure that they're going to value it as much. So in terms of doing a paid trial for Saudi Arabia versus an unpaid to show the value, how did you sort of approach that?
Most of the time, our trials ended up being free. I mean, there was occasionally times we got paid for it, but that would have been the exception. I guess one of the ways I wanted to make sure that my potential customer is investing somehow, right? So in our case, they had to do some work to use it. They had to do some work to get us the data. I want to see some kind of investment somehow. And that's like also, I didn't talk about this a lot, but same thing when you're measuring a pipeline, progress in a pipeline, I care a lot less about how my sales rep tells me it's going. I love to see evidence that my customer is doing something. So, at one point in time, we introduced a measurement thing in our pipeline that was said, hey, we sent them a contract. Well, it turns out my sales reps would start sending people a contract after the first meeting. It was meaningless. The real measure is, have I gotten red lines back? Because that meant the customer had done something. And so it's sort of the same thing about trial. I want them, the customer is making some kind of investment. Mm-hmm. They're doing something is whether or not that's giving me dollars or just applying effort, particularly in big companies, everybody's busy. So if you can get some people to put some effort into it, that's telling you something, right?
That's good.
That's very good. All right, great. Thank you, appreciate it, Patrick. Any other last questions? All right, that's great. Charlie, I think you all did such a great job. You answered all the questions. Thank you.
Well, Patrick, thank you so much for pouring yourself into our community. You always do. And I know that you're also, you make yourself available to entrepreneurs, even if it's not time for them to be asking for money, that you approach them sort of as just an advisor, not just as a VC, which is a good thing. And I appreciate you doing that. I know you do it at ATDC companies and also at ATV. So to all of you, thanks for attending. I look forward to seeing you October 7th. John, thank you for your help. You do a great job. And you guys have a great rest of the day. Take care. God bless you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.